Hello and welcome back to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I'm your host Jesse, and with me today is myself. I didn't have a guest scheduled for this week, and I didn't really have time to find someone who wanted to be on. So I decided to open up my Twitter and my Facebook to questions of people who listen or people who just know me and that know I like comics, and I thought I'd answer a few of those for a pretty short episode this week. Sorry if I'm a little spaced out. It's the end of the week. I'm very tired from working all week. But yeah, I just wanted to put something out this week. I'll probably take some kind of break next month because it's December and holidays and all that. But I have a great guest for next week. I can't wait to talk about that probably tomorrow on Twitter and on Facebook. So if you want to follow us there, us being me, the podcast, there, I should announce that. Sorry if the audio is a little fan heavy. I'm using my old laptop and it's also very loud. So first question that I have is from my friend Annie, asks, what's my favorite part of the comic genre? A lot of these are two-part questions, but I'll answer this first part. I think the best part of the comic book genre is being able to portray scenes and environments that are hard to do anywhere else. With regular books, you have to do a lot of theater of the mind. With audio drama, same thing. With the live action TV show movies, it's hard to do much. And even with animation, there's budget limitations, right? I think animation, it's probably why I watch so much anime and cartoons in general, is because they can do so many different genres. But with regular TV, it's hard to do anything exuberant. So that's why a lot of comic book stuff doesn't really translate, even if they try hard. And sometimes they try too hard to be accurate, and that's why it fails. Sometimes they are not even close to being accurate enough, and that's why it fails. But with comics, one, it's just it's a vast medium. There's a lot of different ways to make a comic book. But two, you can literally have so many different things happening at once. And it can be visually stunning, but at the same time pull out your heart with the visuals and the words behind it. And especially with like big name comic books like the DC and Marvel and the other like licensed stuff, they're so vast and so many writers and artists tackle it that if you don't like it this right now, come back to it like 3 months later, someone else is gonna be on it and you might like it then. So it's unlike TV shows where shows don't usually change because it's the same showrunners for the most part. Every once in a while it might happen. But yeah, comic books are one of those things where they're ever changing, they're ever growing, and they're ever expanding, and they just expand to so many different places that most other visual mediums can't do. And that goes for comics, manga, anything of the sort, like webtoon now, like all of that is in the same vein of comics. Her third question is, what book are you reading right now that you would most recommend to someone new to comics? So that's a kind of a twofold question. There's people who want to read superhero books, and there's people who want to just read a comic. If you just want to read a comic, I think Once and Future King by Karen Gillan and Dan Mora is probably the best book to go for right now. It's familiar territory with King Arthur lore, but at the same time it shows visually and narratively what comics can do. So I think it's one of the best beginner books out there right now. If you want to read like DC or Marvel, it's a bit harder because it's always hard to pick something because they're always in the middle of something. They're always doing something that you have to like read ahead of time. I think any of the Young Animal or Wonder Comics stuff at DC is great for new people who want to just read something that has no pre-context, especially something like Far Sector from N.K. Jemisin, and I can't remember who the artist is on that right now. And Marvel, though, I think if you read, you have to go. I feel like you have to go back at some point and read some of the older stuff, but like modern, I think the new Iron Man is a really good thing because it's like you kind of know where Tony's going. You know that he's trying to get back down to earth in some ways, and like yeah, you don't know who all these characters are, but you know the general feel of what the book is doing. So I think those two are currently like some of the best jumping off points. Patrick asks, are you able to enjoy older comics like Silver and Bronze Age comics? I can. It just depends on the mood I'm in. Sometimes I'm in an honorary mood where I don't find them enjoyable as much. But sometimes you go back to those classic books and you're like, oh wow, these guys had better ideas than most people have today, and it's kind of amazing that they kind of just get buried by time. Another question by Patrick is, do you get Jack Kirby? It took me a long time to get Jack Kirby. Like, I understood his importance to the medium, but it took me a while to actually enjoy his work. I am a major fan of Jack Kirby. I think his later stuff, as much as experimental that some people think it is so important to how comics are done now. I think most modern artists are inspired by Jack Kirby in some way if they've researched him at all, because he did so much with the medium that now people can just do now, and they're called new masters now because they're just imitating what he did back then, and they know they are. So yeah, I get Jack Kirby. What is a book that you feel like is universally loved but you are left cold by? So I think currently the biggest one of these is the second Sean Murphy White Knight book, the Curse of the White Knight. People seem to really like that universe a lot. I like the first one a lot, and other than Sean Murray's weird politics, I think the second one is way too dense and muddy to be enjoyable for me, and a lot of his characterizations feel kind of gross in that second one compared to the first one. Maybe I'm just not a big fan of Bruce and Harley falling in love with each other, but that's besides the point. It's a new universe, so he can do whatever he wants. But I just thought the second one was very messy compared to the first. The first one was very well constructed. Patrick has one more question. What is one canceled book that you'd bring back, and why? What creative team do you want on it? I would love to see West Coast Avengers come back. I know they keep on trying to do it, but just hear me out. Bring it back. Make it the original team, because I think that original team is very, very good. And I know it's one of those things where, like, do you put old talent on it? Do you put new talent on it? I think you should do both. If you can get at least J.D. DeMatteis and Kevin Maguire from the original Justice League International book, and then get like a switch-off artist like Aaron Cooter or someone that's in the same way as McGinnis, and like get someone with the comedic sense nowadays that can co-write the book. I think Leah Williams, who writes X-Men and wrote Gwenpool and all that stuff, I think if you can get two comedians in there and two really good character artists, that could be like the modern Justice League International book, but for Marvel. And I think West Coast Avengers is the perfect team to get that kind of humor, seriousness flow. Chris asks, what gives you hope about new comics, and what do you enjoy about comics that came before your time? So what gives me hope about new comics is the potential for new stories and new voices. Also new readers. Always like seeing new people reading comics, but I think the diversity of voices is getting bigger and bigger, and I think that's important, and I think it's more fun that way, because if you read the people that have the same experiences over and over again, or try to write experiences they've never had, you can tell, and it gets boring. What I like about old comics is I do think there's still a lot of old ideas in old comics that get forgotten, and we either rewrite them now or we just never go back to them, and I think they can be revisited. So I think it's important to do your research when you're writing books, but I think it's also just important to do your research if you're passionate about the medium, because there's legacy there, and it's important in some ways. Sometimes not so much. Sometimes it's just very outdated and very questionable. I'm looking at some old World War II villains from all the comics. And I have one Twitter question to wrap this up by a friend of the show, who's on last episode? Yeah, last episode. Jonathan Thompson, who again, Kickstarter, Burn Residue, still going on. Please support if you can. But he asks, what's your favorite comic and what does it mean to you? Now, my favorite comic changes very often. Not that I have wishy-washy on what's my favorite comic of all time. I think I just add to the list of them because there's a lot of comics that impacted me. If we're going way back to when I first started reading comics, I have a now hard love-hate relationship with Jeff Johns books because of some of the stuff he's done. Some of the more modern writing he's done has, I don't know, dabbled in things that just doesn't make sense or doesn't work for me. But his Teen Titans is one of the first books I ever read and taught me world building, taught me character continuity, taught me like character dynamics, and it made me fall in love with teen books in general, which led me to Morrison's JLA right after, and Mark Waid's JLA. So like, without Jeff Johns' Teen Titans, I don't know if I'd be reading a lot of the books I'm reading now. But modern sense, I think one of the biggest books that impacted me recently and ones I hold dear, for as questionable as the run can be for a lot of people, I think the entire run of Tom King's Batman is extremely important to me now. I always want to write some piece about this, but it's so hard to put into words. But him really, really, really trying hard to humanize Batman in a way that I don't think, at least to me, hasn't been done in recent years, because Scott Snyder's Batman is great. Don't get me wrong, it's fantastic. And so is Grant Morrison's. And so is Frank Miller's and anybody else who's written them. But none of them, to me, have tried to put Batman in human mentality and human thought and human feelings. Snyder's was very much about the darkness of Gotham. Morrison's was about the history of Batman and the lore surrounding him that's so weird. And just Batman being weird, because Batman doesn't get to be weird very often. And then with Damian, he does try to really get that humanity with Damian, but I think it kind of falls on the wayside until the latter half of Batman Incorporated. And then with Frank Miller, it's just Frank Miller being Frank Miller. I don't know what genre to put that in. But yeah, with Tom King's, it's very much the humanity of Batman. Some arcs that really important to me are I Am Suicide, because Batman talks about before he became Batman, he tried to commit suicide, and I'm like, I relate to that. As much as people don't like it, the Nightmares arc, it's very jarring, but I think it's a very important thing to realize that Bruce still has nightmares about a lot of things. I think the wedding stuff is very good, even though it doesn't have an ending like people wanted. And I think the last issue of the run with where he fights his father, and he really shows that like he didn't need Thomas to raise him, he needed just a father, and that was Alfred. Like, that whole thing made me break down after I finished reading it. So I think Tom King's Batman is one of those runs that I would always push to people that I say, this is important comic. This is important comic to me. So yeah. So those are all the questions I got. It's a very short episode, only about 15 minutes. If you want to follow the show, you can follow us on Twitter at Comics Matter Pod. Facebook at facebook.com/comicbooksmatter. Email me at comicbooksmatter@gmail.com. If you want to be a guest on the show, have any questions for guests, have a story about comics impacted your life, reach me at any of those. I'm gladly take any of those, especially since we're heading into December and the new year. I'm trying to contact creators, I'm trying to contact friends, but I don't have connections. So if you want to see people on the show, I need you to let them know as fans or as friends or whatever. Just say, hey, I have a friend that has a comic podcast, or I listen to this comic podcast. It'd be great if you can be on it. That would help me out, or just lead me into the people, like ways to contact people. Other than that, please rate and review wherever you find it. Share with a friend. What else? I think that's all. So remember, everybody, be good to one another.